من لندن ينضم إلينا دانييل ليفي المستشار السابق في مكتب رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي. سيد دانييل، أهلا بك معنا على قناة المشهد في استوديو العرب. بداية، إلى أين تسير الأمور في المنطقة بخصوص القضية الفلسطينية؟ بمعنى ما الذي يخطط له نتنياهو؟ الكثير في حالة إرباك وحيرة يريد أن يعرف.
There's room for some confusion over the details, but I would suggest that there should not be much space left for confusion on the big picture, Mohammed. Mr. Netanyahu has been clear to a significant degree, as have his coalition partners, in telling us what they intend to do and in doing that thing. And what they have been clear to us about is that Gaza is not intended to be a place livable for Palestinians after this destruction. Israel has established an authority for what it calls the voluntary transfer of Palestinians outside of Gaza. However, when you have destroyed the housing stock, the schools, the hospitals, the public institutions, when you have placed a siege starving the public, there's nothing voluntary when you then try and get them out of that area. So Israel is in the process, and I think this is an important shift, which we should not pretend is not happening. Israel is in the process of what it calls, and I'm talking here about much of the coalition, not just these names we've come used to, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but Netanyahu and the Likud as well. Total victory, and total victory is not about Hamas. Total victory is about the Palestinian people. Total victory is about making impossible any kind of Palestinian existence and rights, let alone state. And this is important, we are not just talking here about Gaza. In the West Bank, already 60 to 70,000 Palestinians have been displaced from their existing residence in refugee camps. I'm not saying that this is a goal shared by all of the Israeli population, but those in power right now are really telling us enough with the games. This is the time to make irreversible the finishing of the Palestinian question, not by peace, not by sharing, not by two states, but by finishing the Nakba of the physical removal of Palestinians.
بس سيد دانييل، هل من الضرورة أن ينجح مخطط نتنياهو أم ربما ستكون هناك دول نافذة كبيرة ستقول له كفى وهذا غير مقبول؟
It's a crucial question, Mohammed, and thank you for asking. I would say the following. Many states have used that word, stop, have said, don't do this, have complained, have bemoaned what is happening. The question we have to ask ourselves at this moment, when there are probably more than 60,000 dead in Gaza, where we see the level of destruction and the statements just in the last days by cabinet ministers that parts of the West Bank should also now be flattened. The question we must ask ourselves is, if this is going to stop, will mere rhetoric, will saying the word stop be enough? Or, and I'm answering the question myself because I'm telling you it will need more than words. We will have to see that there is actually a price for Israel if this does not stop, because otherwise it will continue. And what we've seen thus far is the only parties that have done more than words is the Houthis, for instance. But surely there are things that can be done that don't involve military, where I don't like those solutions anyway. I don't believe they bring solutions. Israel has a clear advantage. So the question is, can other leverage be used? Not the kind of leverage the Houthis use, but the leverage that countries have because of their economic relations, whether directly with Israel or with the United States, because they welcome Israelis to their shores and they could change that. Israel, if it does not see that there is a cost, if Israelis don't see that this cannot continue because people impose consequences on the continuation, then Israel will continue. So the words stop are nowhere near enough.
لذلك سيد دانييل قلت في إحدى مقابلاتك بأن الغرب وأمريكا شريك في هذه الغطرسة الإسرائيلية، صحيح؟
I fear it is true because let me put it very simply. Israel could not be doing this. Very clear. Israel could not be doing this if America were not resupplying the weapons, if America were not helping to finance this, if America was not attacking the International Criminal Court, providing the diplomatic, political, economic assistance to Israel, not just America, of course, but America as the preponderant actor here in support of Israel. So this is not just Israel's war. This is America's war. And any Israeli military planner, military expert, member of the senior security establishment will tell you that they could not have carried this on with the supplies, just of the most basic thing, the supplies of weapons, of bombs that they have without the United States. And those supplies have been replenished consistently, including the most devastating of weaponry, which has led to the strikes on hospitals, on shelters, on UN shelters, which has led to this appalling toll in civilian life.
طيب بخصوص الداخل الإسرائيلي، يعني في مسألة صراحة أريد أن أفهمها. أنا أتابع كثيرا الإعلام الإسرائيلي. دعك من جريدة هآرتس لأنه معروف توجهها. الآن هناك كتاب بيكتبوا في معاريف، في يدحوت أحرونوت، في الإعلام، مسؤولين سابقين، محللين، بيقولوا نتنياهو يجرنا إلى الهاوية، يجلب المزيد من الويلات. ما مصدر قوة نتنياهو؟ لماذا لا يستطيع أحد في الداخل الإسرائيلي أن يسقطه الآن؟
It's a crucial point, Mohammed, and it's important to draw your listeners' attention to the fact that we're not talking about a caricature of a country. In every country, there are differences of opinion, and Israel is no exception. In every country, there are competing narratives. Now, first of all, it's important to point out that although Israel prides itself on a free press, there is state censorship. But perhaps more important and more disturbing than the state censorship is that so much of the Israeli media, you mentioned Haaretz, which is an exception, and credit should go to that outlet, but so much of the media chooses to self-censor, chooses to be part of a narrative that has become so blinkered, so cutting off of understanding how the rest of the world sees Israel, what's genuinely happening to the Palestinians, and is part of, it's painful for me to say it, is part of a genocidal narrative. Now, moving beyond that, there is genuine division and polarization inside Israel's Jewish community. Of course, you have 20% of Israelis, citizens who are Palestinian, Arab Israelis. They have largely been marginalized more than in the past and intimidated in the current atmosphere. But in Jewish Israeli society, there are divisions. I wish I could tell you, Mohammed, that those divisions are about empathy, concern, humanity towards Palestinians. That is true for a small minority. There is an anti-apartheid, anti-occupation grouping within Israeli Jewish society. It does not have political power or numbers. But there is a larger group, and this is where the division becomes much more like 50-50, if you like. There is a much larger group of Israelis who haven't got to that place where they're saying this is terrible what's being done to Palestinians, but they are saying this is bad for us as Israeli Jews because we just keep going deeper and deeper into a never-ending war. It's not going to get back the Israeli hostages. That's a big issue, as you would imagine, inside the Israeli debate. They see what's happening to the economy. They see how exhausted society is by 19 months of war. You know, Israel, it's not China. There's not 1 billion plus people. This is a small country where people do reserve duty. Not everyone, by the way. That's another area of division with the ultra-Orthodox. But where people have seen, those who are in the military, who do reserve duty, that they keep getting called up for 30, 60, 90, 200 days. And it's ruining their work life, it's ruining their family life. So they see the cost to their own society, and they see that their government, their prime minister and his coalition allies, they have come to be convinced that they are doing this not for the security or the good of the country or to make Israel safer, but they are doing this for their narrow personal political calculations, and because some have an ideological agenda of removing Palestinians, resettling Gaza, which is going too far for them. Having said that, there is a very significant, and they are much more determined, cohort of Israelis for whom that is precisely the goal. This is the opportunity to finish the job with the Palestinians. They see things through an extreme religious, nationalist ideology, and they are in power right now. And that's the fault line. But unfortunately, Netanyahu has been able to carry the coalition, enough of the public, enough of the media, and crucially, he is not being challenged, not by other states in the region, not by the United States, and therefore there's not enough Israelis who see that this is too costly. That's where we are.
يعني اسمح لي أنوع في الأسئلة ما بين سياسي، ديني، اجتماعي، لأنه أنا أتابعك جدا وأكاد لا أفوت يعني لقاء لك في الإعلام الغربي لأنك تتحدث من منطلق العارف. الآن إسرائيل يعني وأقصد الحكومة ومن يقود يبرر ما يفعل بالفلسطينيين باسم الرب وأوامر الرب وباسم الدين، ومنشوف حتى أسماء يعني أطلقوا على العملية العسكرية الإسرائيلية في غزة عربات جدعون، ميركافوت جدعون. هذا أنت كشخص يهودي ألا تشعر بأنه في إساءة لدينك اليهودي وهم يبررون هذه الأفعال باسم الدين؟
You have put it better than I could put it, Ahmed. That is exactly how myself, and here I'm not alone in this. There is a real rift in the Jewish world today, especially in the diaspora, because some of us, at least, and we are a growing number, see this in precisely those terms. We see this as the exact opposite of what we were brought up with, to understand that there is a Jewish ethic, a Jewish moral, which is universal, which doesn't just see Jewish life as precious, but any life. And of course, this is embedded in Jewish history as well. And that the lesson, especially of the horrors of the last century and the Holocaust, is not never again to us, but never again, full stop. Now, Mohammed, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know if I tell you that one of the things about religious texts is they can be interpreted in multiple ways. So I'll give my interpretation and others will give the exact opposite interpretation, and that's not exclusive to Judaism. We just saw the Catholic Church electing a new pope, and there were those who were saying the essence of Catholicism is to be one way, the opposite of Pope Francis, and those who were saying, no, Pope Francis got it exactly right. That's what Catholicism is about. So it's true in any religion, and it's certainly true in Judaism. And what you have today is a strong constituency inside Israel. And of course, it has its supporters on the outside as well. A strong constituency who say, this is precisely why we do this. It's the land promised to us, not to anyone else. There's no Palestinians. And there's the history of Amalek, which is an analogy that the prime minister used. The only way to do things is to destroy the enemy. And they will point to stories in the Bible and elsewhere where they feel it justifies their approach. That's, I would suggest, a very important fault line also. Because in a way, Mohammed, what we're seeing is almost a race between, can Israel destroy the Palestinians enough before Israeli society itself starts to unravel? These divisions become impossible to manage. You have people like former Prime Minister Olmert saying Israel has never been closer to a civil war. You have battles within the security establishment. So I know that people in the region look at Israel and say, wow, they do some bad things, but look how powerful they are. And one of the things I would question is how powerful a state can be when it is so internally divided and so close to an unprecedented internal clash.
طب لك يعني كلام رائع، حقا رائع جدا. لك أيضا تعبيران إنسانيان انتشرا كثيرا في العالم العربي، يعني لك شهرة الآن في العالم العربي. الأول عندما سئلت في بداية الحرب هل من حق الفلسطيني أن يعود إلى أرضه؟ كان جوابك رائع. قلت إنه إذا كان لوالدتك التي نجت من المحرقة الحق ولوالدك الذي هرب من أوروبا الشرقية الحق في استيطان هذه الأرض، فكيف لابن الأرض الأصلي الفلسطيني ألا يعود؟ هذه القناعة يعني تحملها منذ أيام يعني شبابك، وأنت ما زلت شباب بكل الأحوال، أم تغيرت هذه القناعات مع الزمن؟
First, thank you for your kind words, Mohammed. And yes, if I'm being a bit unkind to myself, I could say, you know, today's me versus the naive, youthful me. If I'm being a little more kind to myself, I think as humans, we all go on a journey. We all learn from our experiences, our direct experiences, and other things. I never considered myself as someone who moved from the UK as a settler to enact an ideology that would exclude Palestinians. I do consider that what has gone on there has had that effect. I do consider that you cannot have it considered legitimate that Jews persecuted around the world, and we call ourselves a diaspora, but most of us, you know, don't have family lineage that we can draw a line of connection to anyone in that country indigenously, whereas Palestinians can. Palestinians in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the camps, in Gaza, in the West Bank, Palestinians in Chile, in America, Europe, wherever you like, okay? So in that respect, we have to understand that if Jewish Israelis, and this is something I try to argue to Jewish Israelis, are going to have a secure future, then they have to come to terms with Palestinian, not only existence, but history, and the history of the Nakba, and the fact that you have to make that good. Make that good, I mean, you have to make right. You have to accept your responsibility. There has to be justice and truth and reconciliation in terms of what was done to Palestinians. Now, what I'm trying to argue to people, and I'll quote Rashid Khalidi, I'm sure you're familiar with him, Columbia University professor, well-known Palestinian historian. Rashid Khalidi has said that just because Zionism was a settler colonial enterprise, it doesn't mean that now, generations later, the Israeli Jews are not a distinct national community. They are. And so what the hard thing to do is to acknowledge the Palestinian connection, Palestinian indigeneity, and at the same time acknowledge that the Israeli Jews are not going anywhere. So we have to share this land. And the idea for many years was have two states. Palestinians would also have to have justice on the refugee question. Palestinians inside Israel would also have to be equal. Perhaps two states is not possible anymore because Israel has created a one-state reality. Perhaps we have to have equality, but both peoples need to find their future and their well-being in that space. And by the way, that question of Palestinian attachment to the land, that indigeneity, is something that I think right now we see. People on the outside, especially in the West, who have these ideas of a Riviera. Let's remove the Palestinians. Why wouldn't they be happier in another country? Of course not, because they are attached to their land. If you're a real estate developer, or if you come from a settler colonial mindset, then you don't really get that idea of a people attached to the land. But that is true of the Palestinians. And as I said before, for me, it is an affront to intelligence, let alone what is right, to suggest that people who have lived for thousands of years outside of that land have more right to be in that land than people who can still hold the key of their grandparents to a home in Jaffa or Haifa or Lid or somewhere else.
التعبير الإنساني الثاني كان في مجلس الأمن وأمام الوفد الإسرائيلي لما قلت أنه إذا كنا سنتوقف لحظة صمت على طفلين إسرائيليين قتلا في غزة فنحن في حاجة إلى 300 ساعة صمت حدادا على أرواح 18,000 طفل فلسطيني قتلهم القصف يعني في غزة. تصريحات من هذا القبيل كيف تجد أصداءها في صفوف الإسرائيليين وخاصة أنه كان أمامك الوفد الإسرائيلي؟
I must, if I may, admit, Mohammed, that I wanted to try and grab that room and shake people out of the state of, I don't know if it's indifference or paralysis. And so I looked for an eye-catching number. And I said that if the Bibas twins, it would be reasonable to have a minute's silence. If we did that for every lost Palestinian child under 18, it would be, I think it was 300 hours. I noticed that just some days ago, Tom Fletcher, the head of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, made a very effective intervention where he challenged people that we cannot be bystanders. I wasn't looking at the Israeli delegation at the time. There was someone who had been a hostage who was part of that grouping. I noted watching afterwards that she paid close attention. Unfortunately, most of the members of the Israeli diplomatic mission, the ambassador, were on their phones and doing other things. If I told you that surprised me, I would be lying. It didn't surprise me. What it tells me is that something is going fundamentally wrong in that country. That you had the last ambassador took, if you remember, he took a shredding machine in one of his speeches at the UN, and he put the UN Charter into the shredding machine. The Israeli Prime Minister called the United Nations, I think it was a cesspool of anti-Semitism. Israel treats international institutions, international law, the International Court of Justice, treats the idea of our shared humanity with such contempt today. And I wish that was not the case. And I would suggest to you and your audience that one of the reasons that is the case is that they have got so used to getting away with it. They have gotten so used to impunity that Israel can do anything. And maybe someone says, oh, that's no good. Someone gives a nice speech, but no one actually says, we'll stop selling arms to you. We'll stop doing trade with you. We won't make that investment. Your tourists can't come here without visas, whatever. You're not going to be allowed to play an international sport with us. I don't want to see those measures. But if those are the measures that are needed for Israelis to start thinking, wait a minute, then it's what happened in South Africa under apartheid. At first they said, oh, the rest of the world is wrong. But then they started saying, is there something abnormal with our society? Is there something we can do different? And eventually, it creates a demand for change, often not for moral reasons, but for practical reasons. I want to go visit that country. I want to do trade. We need to be able to buy stuff from this place. We want to be an international sport. That was the big one for South Africa. And so what I'm saying is that as long as Israel sees that it can get away with this without practical consequences, things won't change. Of course, that's a disaster for the Palestinians. But what I always try and argue is that this is not good for Israelis either.
طيب أخيراً كي لا أطيل عليك، وأنا أعرف أنه الحوار معك فعلاً يعني ممتع، بس على الأقل كي أكسبك في مقابلات أخرى لاحقاً. السؤال الأخير، كنت مستشاراً يعني في رئاسة الحكومة مرتين، مفاوض للسلام مع الفلسطينيين. ما زال في أمل أن نعود إلى مسار التفاوض، إلى مسار السلام، وأنت شخصياً أن تعود إلى منصب كهذا؟
I would welcome a reality in which that was again possible. I would just maybe close with saying this, which is my suggestion would be, let's not go back to anything, because what we tried before has failed. And therefore, I would encourage people to get outside of the confines of Oslo, of some of the relationships that exist now in the region, and think differently. Always hold out the possibility of a better future also for the Israeli Jewish public, but let's think how we can create a possibility for peace on a different basis, because what we've tried for the last decades has failed, and what we have today is something that's not even intended to achieve the result. Whenever anyone says peace process, go back to Oslo, I fear that they are trying to funnel us back into something that is designed at this stage to fail, and we have to break out of that. And I'm happy to be a partner for any effort that helps us break out of that.
شكرا لك من لندن دانييل ليفي، المستشار السابق في مكتب رئيس الوزراء الإسرائيلي، على هذا الحوار. شكرا لك.
Thank you, Mohammed.